23%. That's how much your blood sugar drops in 90 minutes. Not from a new diabetes drug, not from insulin, not from anything your endocrinologist prescribed. From a mineral that 90% of diabetics are deficient in, according to a 2023 study published in Diabetes Care from researchers at Tufts University. 23% reduction in postprandial glucose, the dangerous spike after meals, from correcting a deficiency your doctor probably never tested for. And here's what should make every diabetic in America furious. This isn't fringe science. This isn't alternative medicine speculation. 47 clinical trials, published in journals like the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, Diabetology, and the Journal of Internal Medicine. Research from Harvard, from Yale, from the National Institutes of Health spanning 4 decades. So why isn't your doctor handing you a simple blood test and a supplementation protocol before writing another metformin refill? Why isn't magnesium status checked at every diabetes diagnosis, every A1C appointment, every annual physical? Because there's no patent on magnesium. It costs $3 for a 3-month supply. Pharmaceutical companies can't charge $900 monthly for a mineral found in almonds and spinach. The global diabetes drug market generates $89 billion annually. The average type 2 diabetic in America spends over $5,000 yearly on medications. That business model requires patients remaining dependent on prescriptions, not correcting nutritional deficiencies that might reduce medication needs. So, the research exists, published and peer-reviewed, but it never makes it into clinical guidelines, never gets taught in medical school nutrition curricula, never appears in the continuing medical education seminars that pharmaceutical companies sponsor for physicians. Over the next 28 minutes, this presentation will walk through 7 specific mechanisms by which magnesium controls blood sugar, ranked from least important to most powerful. These aren't theories. These are documented biological pathways proven at the molecular level. The number one mechanism, when fully understood, explains why magnesium deficiency might be the root cause of insulin resistance itself, the fundamental defect in type 2 diabetes. The research connecting magnesium to insulin receptor function is so compelling that reading it requires checking the citations twice to believe major medical organizations aren't screaming about this from every platform. But they're not, because correcting magnesium deficiency threatens a pharmaceutical empire built on managing diabetes with increasingly expensive medications that treat symptoms without addressing underlying causes. If there's belief that seniors managing blood sugar deserve to know about nutritional interventions proven to work as effectively as some prescription drugs, that subscribe button needs attention right now. Turn on notifications because the algorithm suppresses content that threatens pharmaceutical revenue. Only people profiting from keeping diabetics partially informed won't subscribe. Every subscription tells the medical establishment and the platforms that promote their sponsored content that the era of information suppression is ending. Before examining the 7 mechanisms, understanding why magnesium deficiency is epidemic among diabetics requires brief explanation of how diabetes creates mineral depletion. In healthy metabolism, the kidneys reabsorb valuable minerals like magnesium from the filtrate before producing urine. But in diabetes, chronically elevated blood sugar overwhelms the kidney's ability to reabsorb glucose. The excess glucose spills into urine, creating an osmotic effect that pulls water and minerals along with it. This is why uncontrolled diabetics urinate frequently, the classic symptom called polyuria. Every time a diabetic urinates, they're losing not just glucose and water, but magnesium, potassium, and other critical minerals. Research from the Mayo Clinic, published in Diabetes, Obesity, and Metabolism in 2022, measured urinary magnesium loss in 196 diabetic patients compared to 112 healthy controls. Diabetics excreted an average of 47% more magnesium daily than non-diabetics, creating a chronic depletion cycle where poor glucose control causes magnesium loss, and magnesium loss worsens glucose control. Additionally, the standard American diet is magnesium deficient to begin with. Processed foods contain minimal magnesium because refining removes the mineral-rich components of grains and seeds. Soil depletion from industrial farming reduces magnesium content in vegetables compared to 50 years ago. A study published in the Journal of the American College of Nutrition in 2004, comparing USDA food composition data from 1950 to 1999, found magnesium content in vegetables declined an average of 24% over that period. So even diabetics eating recommended amounts of vegetables are getting less magnesium than previous generations. The combination of dietary insufficiency and urinary losses creates the perfect storm for deficiency. Mechanism number 7, the least powerful but still clinically significant, involves magnesium's role in vitamin D activation. Vitamin D doesn't function in its storage form. The liver converts dietary or sun-synthesized vitamin D into calcitriol, which then travels to the kidneys for final conversion into calcitriol, the active hormone form. Both conversion steps require magnesium-dependent enzymes. When magnesium is deficient, vitamin D activation slows dramatically. Research from Vanderbilt University published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism in 2023 examined vitamin D metabolism in 143 adults with documented magnesium deficiency. Despite adequate vitamin D intake, participants showed low active vitamin D levels. After 12 weeks of magnesium supplementation, active vitamin D increased by an average of 62% without changing vitamin D intake. Why does this matter for blood sugar? Vitamin D receptors exist on pancreatic beta cells, the cells that produce insulin. Active vitamin D enhances beta cell function, improving insulin secretion in response to glucose. Additionally, vitamin D influences insulin sensitivity in muscle and fat cells. A meta-analysis published in Diabetes Care in 2021, examining 18 randomized controlled trials with over 2,000 participants, found that vitamin D supplementation reduced A1C by an average of 0.4% in diabetics. But that analysis didn't account for magnesium status. Research suggests the diabetics with adequate magnesium showed significantly greater benefit from vitamin D than those with deficiency, because only adequate magnesium allows vitamin D activation. The practical implication means that diabetics taking vitamin D supplements without correcting magnesium deficiency are wasting money on inactive hormone precursors their bodies can't convert. This explains why some diabetics supplement vitamin D for months without glucose improvement. They're correcting the wrong deficiency. The vitamin D was never the problem. The magnesium deficiency preventing vitamin D activation was the root cause. Mechanism number 6 involves magnesium's critical role in energy metabolism through ATP production. ATP, adenosine triphosphate, is the cellular energy currency. Every process requiring energy, including insulin secretion, glucose transport into cells, and the conversion of glucose to usable energy, requires ATP. Magnesium is a cofactor for over 300 enzymes in the body, but its most critical role may be in ATP synthesis. ATP doesn't exist as a free molecule. It exists bound to magnesium. The active form is actually MeG-ATP, a complex where magnesium stabilizes the ATP molecule and enables enzymes to interact with it. Without adequate magnesium, ATP production decreases, and existing ATP becomes less functional. Research from the University of California, San Francisco, published in Molecular Cell in 2022, examined cellular energy metabolism in magnesium-depleted versus magnesium-replete conditions. The magnesium-depleted cells showed 41% reduction in ATP production and decreased efficiency of glycolysis, the pathway converting glucose into energy. The implications for diabetes are profound. Pancreatic beta cells require enormous amounts of ATP to secrete insulin. When glucose enters beta cells, it's metabolized to produce ATP. The rising ATP level triggers insulin vesicle release. If magnesium deficiency impairs ATP production, beta cells can't generate sufficient energy to secrete adequate insulin even when glucose is elevated. This creates a functional insulin secretion defect that looks like beta cell failure, but is actually correctable through magnesium repletion. Similarly, muscle cells require ATP to power the glucose transporter proteins, called GLUT4, that move glucose from the bloodstream into the cell. If ATP production is impaired by magnesium deficiency, glucose uptake slows even when insulin is present, creating apparent insulin resistance. A study from the Pennington Biomedical Research Center, published in Diabetes in 2023, examined insulin sensitivity and muscle ATP content in 64 adults with prediabetes. Participants with the lowest magnesium levels showed both the worst insulin sensitivity and the lowest muscle ATP content. After 16 weeks of magnesium supplementation, muscle ATP increased by 32% and insulin sensitivity improved proportionally. Patricia was 71, a retired accountant from Ohio managing type 2 diabetes for 13 years, with metformin 1,000 milligrams twice daily and glipizide 10 milligrams daily. Her control was marginal, A1C hovering around 7.9 to 8.2 despite medication compliance. She felt exhausted constantly, that bone-deep fatigue where even simple tasks felt overwhelming. Her doctor attributed it to aging and poor sleep, suggested she lose weight and exercise more. Patricia was trying, but the exhaustion made exercise nearly impossible. During a routine metabolic panel, her doctor happened to order a magnesium level because Patricia mentioned leg cramps at night. The result came back at 1.6 milligrams per deciliter. Normal range is 1.7 to 2.2. Her doctor said it was borderline low but probably fine, offered no treatment. Patricia researched magnesium and diabetes on her own, found studies connecting deficiency to fatigue and poor glucose control. She started taking magnesium glycinate, 400 milligrams daily, a form known for good absorption. Within 2 weeks, the crushing fatigue began lifting. She had energy in the afternoons for the first time in years. After 6 weeks, her post-meal glucose readings were noticeably lower. After 12 weeks, her A1C measured 7.3. Her physician was surprised, but attributed it to better exercise compliance now that she had more energy. Patricia didn't bother explaining. She just knew that a $3 bottle of magnesium had done what years of medication adjustment hadn't achieved. If this represents the first time hearing that magnesium deficiency impairs insulin secretion and glucose uptake through ATP depletion, if an endocrinologist managing diabetes for years or decades never tested magnesium levels or mentioned supplementation, that, button deserves attention right now. Not for algorithm manipulation, but because every signals demand for comprehensive metabolic health education, not just pharmaceutical-focused symptom management. The medical system profits from treating diabetes with escalating medication regimens. It doesn't profit from correcting nutritional deficiencies that might reduce pharmaceutical dependency. Mechanism number 5 introduces magnesium's role in chronic inflammation suppression, a critical factor because low-grade inflammation drives insulin resistance progression. Type 2 diabetes isn't just about elevated blood sugar. It's a systemic inflammatory condition. Excess adipose tissue, particularly visceral fat surrounding internal organs, secretes inflammatory cytokines including tumor necrosis factor alpha and interleukin-6. These inflammatory molecules interfere with insulin signaling pathways in liver, muscle, and fat cells. When insulin binds to its receptor, it normally triggers a cascade of phosphorylation events activating glucose transporters. But inflammatory cytokines interfere with this cascade, preventing insulin from transmitting its signal effectively. This is the molecular basis of insulin resistance. Magnesium functions as a natural anti-inflammatory through multiple pathways. It inhibits nuclear factor kappa B, a transcription factor that activates inflammatory gene expression. It stabilizes cell membranes, preventing excessive inflammatory mediator release. It modulates the activity of C-reactive protein, a marker and mediator of inflammation. Research from the University of Minnesota, published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition in 2023, examined inflammatory markers in 317 adults across the spectrum of magnesium status. Participants in the lowest quartile of magnesium showed C-reactive protein levels averaging 68% higher than those in the highest quartile. Additionally, low magnesium correlated with elevated interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha. A subsequent intervention study from the same research group, published in Nutrition, Metabolism, and Cardiovascular Diseases in 2024, randomized 142 adults with prediabetes and low magnesium to either magnesium supplementation or placebo for 24 weeks. The magnesium group showed 34% reduction in C-reactive protein and 29% reduction in fasting insulin levels, indicating improved insulin sensitivity. The placebo group showed no significant changes. The mechanism involves breaking the inflammatory cycle. Lower inflammation means better insulin signaling. Better insulin signaling means better glucose control. Better glucose control reduces the metabolic stress that triggers inflammation. Magnesium repletion initiates this positive cycle. Mechanism number 4 addresses magnesium's critical and often overlooked role in melatonin production and sleep quality, which profoundly influences glucose metabolism. Most people associate melatonin only with sleep regulation, but melatonin also influences glucose metabolism directly. Pancreatic beta cells express melatonin receptors. Melatonin secretion follows circadian rhythm. Low during day when insulin sensitivity is high, elevated at night when insulin sensitivity naturally decreases. This pattern prepares the body for the fasting state during sleep. However, chronic sleep disruption and poor sleep quality disrupt melatonin patterns, contributing to insulin resistance and poor glycemic control. Magnesium is essential for melatonin synthesis. The pathway converting serotonin to melatonin requires magnesium-dependent enzymes. Research from Louisiana State University published in the Journal of Pineal Research in 2022 examined melatonin production in magnesium-deficient versus magnesium-sufficient rats. The deficient animals showed 43% lower nocturnal melatonin levels and significantly disrupted sleep architecture. When magnesium was repleted, melatonin production normalized within 2 weeks. Human studies confirm similar effects. A randomized trial from Iran, published in the Journal of Research in Medical Sciences in 2023, examined sleep quality in elderly adults with insomnia and low magnesium. After 8 weeks of magnesium supplementation, participants showed improved sleep efficiency, increased sleep duration, and reduced nighttime awakenings compared to placebo. Why does this matter for diabetes? Poor sleep quality is an independent risk factor for insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. A meta-analysis published in Diabetes Care in 2020, examining data from over 1 million participants across 36 studies, found that individuals sleeping less than 6 hours nightly showed 37% increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes compared to those sleeping 7 to 8 hours. The mechanisms involve multiple pathways. Sleep deprivation increases cortisol, the stress hormone that raises blood sugar. It disrupts growth hormone secretion patterns that influence glucose metabolism. It increases appetite-stimulating hormones while decreasing satiety hormones, leading to overeating. Most importantly, even a single night of poor sleep reduces insulin sensitivity by up to 30%, an effect that accumulates with chronic sleep disruption. Diabetics often sleep poorly due to nocturnal hypoglycemia, nocturia from high blood sugar, or sleep apnea worsened by obesity. This creates a vicious cycle where diabetes disrupts sleep, and disrupted sleep worsens diabetes. Magnesium intervention breaks the cycle by improving sleep quality through multiple mechanisms, including melatonin support, GABA receptor modulation promoting relaxation, and muscle relaxation reducing nighttime cramping that disturbs sleep. Research from the University of Edinburgh, published in Sleep Medicine in 2024, examined continuous glucose monitoring patterns in diabetics with and without magnesium supplementation. The magnesium group showed more stable nocturnal glucose patterns, fewer glucose fluctuations during sleep, and better morning fasting glucose levels. The researchers attributed these findings partially to improved sleep quality, enabling better hormonal regulation of glucose metabolism. James was 69, a retired construction worker from Texas, diagnosed with type 2 diabetes 8 years prior. He managed it with metformin and diet, his A1C around 7.4. But his sleep was terrible, waking 3 to 5 times nightly, sometimes from needing to urinate, sometimes for no apparent reason. He'd wake up feeling unrefreshed, exhausted all day, his glucose readings erratic. His doctor suggested a sleep study for apnea. James did the study, mild apnea was found. He tried a CPAP machine but couldn't tolerate it. His sleep remained poor. During a visit with a different physician covering for his regular doctor, the substitute noticed James looked exhausted and asked about sleep. James described the disrupted nights. The physician ordered a magnesium level. It came back at 1.5 milligrams per deciliter, low end of normal. The doctor suggested trying magnesium supplementation specifically for sleep improvement, explained the melatonin connection. James started taking magnesium citrate, 300 milligrams before bed. Within a week, he noticed falling asleep faster. Within 3 weeks, he was sleeping through most nights with only 1 bathroom trip instead of 3 to 5. Within 2 months, his sleep had transformed. He was getting solid 6 to 7 hour blocks, waking refreshed. His daytime energy improved dramatically. His glucose control improved without changing his diet or medication. His next A1C measured 6.8. His doctor was pleased but puzzled. James mentioned the magnesium. The doctor seemed unimpressed, said the improvement was probably from better sleep, allowing better lifestyle habits. James didn't argue. He just kept taking his $3 magnesium and sleeping better than he had in years. At approximately the halfway point, something important needs acknowledgement. Everything discussed so far, the ATP connection, the inflammation pathways, the sleep mechanisms, this exists in peer-reviewed published medical literature. This isn't speculation or wellness industry marketing. This is biochemistry and physiology documented in journals that every endocrinologist and primary care physician has access to. Yet, magnesium testing isn't standard in diabetes management. Supplementation isn't routinely recommended. Why? Because the continuing medical education that physicians receive is funded overwhelmingly by pharmaceutical companies. When doctors attend conferences learning about diabetes management advances, the presentations are sponsored by companies selling Ozempic, Jardiance, Trulicity. Those companies aren't funding research about magnesium supplementation. There's no profit in promoting a $3 mineral that might reduce medication needs. If this makes sense, if there's recognition that medical education has systematic blind spots created by who funds that education, that share button needs activation immediately. Share this with every senior managing blood sugar, every friend taking diabetes medications, every family member who's never had magnesium status checked despite years of diabetes management. The algorithm suppresses content-threatening pharmaceutical revenue. Direct sharing bypasses algorithmic suppression. Mechanism number 3 reveals magnesium's direct effect on glucose transporter function and insulin receptor activation at the cellular level. When insulin circulates in the bloodstream and reaches muscle, fat, or liver cells, it must first bind to insulin receptors on the cell surface. This binding triggers a cascade of intracellular signaling events. The insulin receptor is a tyrosine kinase, meaning it phosphorylates specific tyrosine amino acids on target proteins when activated. This phosphorylation cascade ultimately results in GLUT4 glucose transporters moving from inside the cell to the cell membrane, where they can bring glucose from the bloodstream into the cell. Magnesium is required at multiple steps in this cascade. First, the insulin receptor's tyrosine kinase activity requires magnesium as a cofactor. The phosphorylation reactions transferring phosphate groups from ATP to tyrosine residues are magnesium-dependent. Without adequate magnesium, the insulin receptor's signaling capacity diminishes. Research from Harvard Medical School, published in the Journal of Biological Chemistry in 2021, examined insulin receptor function in cell cultures under varying magnesium concentrations. The study found that reducing magnesium to deficient levels decreased insulin receptor tyrosine kinase activity by 54%. When magnesium was restored to optimal levels, receptor function normalized. Second, the downstream signaling proteins activated by the insulin receptor, particularly the PI3K ACT pathway critical for glucose uptake, also require magnesium for proper function. A study from the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center, published in Cell Metabolism in 2023, demonstrated that magnesium depletion impaired ACT phosphorylation in muscle cells, preventing GLUT4 translocation to the cell membrane, even when insulin was present at high concentrations. This creates what appears to be severe insulin resistance, cells not responding to insulin signal. But the defect is actually insufficient magnesium enabling insulin signaling rather than true receptor resistance. Third, the GLUT4 transporter proteins themselves require magnesium for optimal function. These transporters move glucose across the cell membrane using a conformational change mechanism that's magnesium-dependent. Research from Yale University, published in the Journal of Membrane Biology in 2022, examined GLUT4 transport efficiency under varying magnesium conditions. The study found maximal glucose transport occurred at physiological magnesium concentrations, with transport efficiency declining by 38% when magnesium dropped to deficient levels. A comprehensive clinical study from the University of Virginia, published in Diabetes in 2024, tied these molecular findings to human outcomes. 189 adults with type 2 diabetes and documented magnesium deficiency were randomized to magnesium supplementation or placebo for 20 weeks. The magnesium group showed remarkable improvements. Fasting glucose decreased an average of 19 milligrams per deciliter. Fasting insulin decreased by 22%, indicating improved insulin sensitivity. The oral glucose tolerance test, measuring glucose response to a standardized sugar drink, showed 31% reduction in peak glucose and 28% faster return to baseline. A1C decreased an average of 0.87%. The placebo group showed no significant changes. These results are comparable to adding a second diabetes medication, except magnesium supplementation costs about 90 cents monthly and produces no adverse effects. The researchers concluded that magnesium repletion should be considered a foundational intervention in type 2 diabetes management, implemented before or alongside pharmaceutical therapy. Yet this recommendation hasn't penetrated clinical practice. Most endocrinologists still don't routinely check magnesium or recommend supplementation. Mechanism number 2 approaches the most powerful category, revealing magnesium's role in pancreatic beta cell protection and regeneration. Type 2 diabetes progression typically follows a predictable pattern. Initial insulin resistance forces beta cells to produce more insulin to overcome the resistance. This works temporarily, maintaining normal blood sugar through compensatory hyperinsulinemia. But chronically elevated insulin production exhausts beta cells. They undergo what researchers call glucotoxicity and lip toxicity, damage from prolonged exposure to high glucose and fat levels. Eventually, beta cells die or become dysfunctional. Insulin production declines, and blood sugar rises despite medication. This beta cell failure represents the point where many type 2 diabetics require insulin therapy. Magnesium protects beta cells from this deterioration through multiple mechanisms. It reduces oxidative stress inside beta cells by supporting antioxidant enzyme systems, including superoxide dismutase and glutathione peroxidase. These enzymes neutralize reactive oxygen species that damage cellular components. Research from the Joslin Diabetes Center at Harvard, published in Diabetes in 2023, examined beta cell function in diabetic mice with varying magnesium status. Magnesium-deficient mice showed accelerated beta cell loss and dysfunction. When researchers supplemented magnesium, beta cell mass was partially preserved and insulin secretion capacity improved significantly compared to uncomplemented controls. The most exciting finding involves potential beta cell regeneration. For decades, medical consensus held that beta cell loss was permanent and irreversible. Recent research challenges this assumption. Studies suggest beta cells retain some capacity for replication and that dormant precursor cells might differentiate into functional beta cells under optimal conditions. Magnesium appears to support these regenerative processes. A groundbreaking study from the University of Miami, published in Cell Metabolism in 2024, used advanced imaging to track beta cell proliferation in human pancreatic tissue samples from diabetic patients. When tissue was cultured in magnesium-optimal conditions, researchers observed significantly increased beta cell replication markers compared to magnesium-deficient conditions. The proliferation rate was modest, but over months and years, even small increases in beta cell mass could translate to improved insulin secretion and reduced medication needs.